So we can think of real numbers as horizontal vectors. A positive real number, a vector going to the right, and a negative real number, a vector going to the left. Now, these vectors, adding numbers just corresponds to adding vectors. So if we have a number 1 and we have another number -1, if we add them together, we're just adding vectors in a normal way. So you've got 1 and -1, 1 plus -1 equals 0, and so on. Okay, so that's straightforward. Now, when you multiply two numbers together, well, you take the lengths of the vectors and you multiply the lengths. But what rule we can add is to say that, well, what happens if you multiply a positive number by a negative number? So we come up with this rule which says if you multiply by a negative number, then you need to, the result gets rotated by 180 degrees. So basically to multiply 1 by -1, what we do is we rotate this 1 by 180 degrees to get the -1. Okay. So we think of this -1 as having an angle of 180 degrees from the direction pointing to the right. Okay. So if we use that rule, then it explains why when I multiply -1 by -1, the rule says that if I take my vector and then I rotate it by 180 degrees. Okay, so if I multiply -1 by -1, I take my -1 vector and then rotate it by 180 degrees to give me the answer of +1. Okay. So if we then say, well, what's the square root of 1? Well, the answer is I can think of 1 as having a direction of either 0 degrees or 360 degrees. So to find the square root of 1, I need to ask the question, well, when I multiply the square root of 1 by itself, I will end up doubling the angle. So obviously 0 plus 0 is equal to 0 degrees, so that's going to give me +1. But also 180 degrees plus 180 degrees will give me 360 degrees, which is equivalent to 0 degrees. So a vector pointing in the direction 180 degrees is precisely -1. So -1 is the square root of 1 as well as 1. Now, what about the square root of -1? So in this case, the number -1 is a vector pointing in the direction either 180 degrees or equivalently -180 degrees. So I need something which, when I double the angle, gives me a vector pointing at 180 degrees. Well, the answer to that is a vector pointing upwards at 90 degrees. If I double this angle, then I get a vector pointing at 180 degrees. Or similarly, if I have a vector at -90 degrees, or 90 degrees in the opposite direction, then I double this angle and I'll get -1. So this vector here, which is, we're sort of thinking of the real number line as having 0, 1, 2, -1, -2. Vectors pointing along here for positive numbers, vectors pointing along here for negative numbers. This is a vector which is pointing perpendicular to the real number line. And we call this mysterious number here an imaginary number, and it's given the symbol I. So I is just the square root of -1. The vector pointing in the direction of -90 degrees is just going to be -I. So that's a sort of geometrical picture of where imaginary numbers come from.